Okay, folks, hello. It's ECM. It's Resistance Live for the 27th of June, 2025. It's not a good day. So I'm just going to warn you all of that before we even get started. It's really not a good day in the context of like the history of America. And we're going to talk about all the reasons why, and particularly about several decisions that have come out of the Supreme Court this morning, one of which is really, really, really bad, and what it means, and also the ways in which it creates some silver linings that can actually be exploited right now, because you all know I don't show up here just to share the bad news. I show up to help you all figure out, and all of us to figure out how we're going to get around it and through it. So we have an enormous amount to cover today. Stick with me, but I'm going to explain it all to you and answer a bunch of questions off the Patreon feed. And I want everybody to kind of grasp that it's a very important and significant day, and yet we have to strategize around it. And, you know, I'm with Mariam Kaba, has been online this morning, just like me. Like, I'm actually still in my workout clothes, believe it or not, but because I didn't have time to even get changed. But Mariam Kaba has been online this morning already saying, like, okay, what's the next step? What's the next strategy? How are we going to work through this? Who are the lawyers who are going to talk us through this and figure out the strategy in order to do what's next? So we have an enormous amount to cover. It's over, may have scared a bunch of you, but I'm just going to say, as far as thumbnails go, but I'm just going to say this, right? There is something very specific that is over this morning that impacts the civil rights and the human rights of every single person in this country. And that's not inaccurate. It's not fear mongering. It's actually true. So first things first, today I'm wearing a white t-shirt. My hair is pulled back. I have some dangly earrings in. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. All right. So this morning, in a case that is captioned Trump v. CASA, CASA, for those of you who don't know, is a very prominent national immigration rights action network, ruled in the birthright citizenship case that the lower courts of our judicial system do not have the power to issue universal injunctions. So what does this mean? This means essentially that the court has now ruled that when you come before a court asking for an injunction against an executive order issued by the Trump administration, it cannot be issued on behalf of anyone who is not before that specific court. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's just say hypothetically, you are someone who, was born to an undocumented mother in the state of Texas. You sue in federal court to assure that your birthright citizenship is maintained despite Trump's EO. The judge hearing that case can only issue an injunction with regard to you as of this morning. It cannot bar the effectivity of that executive order anywhere else. That's what this ruling means, okay? And it also means that if you are someone born to an undocumented mother in the state of New York, and a judge in New York says that you have birthright citizenship, but a judge in Texas tells someone in the same position that they don't, that's how it works now. First of all, it's going to create absolute chaos in the federal courts. But second of all, it also has completely eliminated the ability of federal courts to stop Trump's executive orders in their tracks. Gone. Over. And this is really bad. I can't sugarcoat it in any way, shape, or form. It means that, for instance, executive orders that say trans soldiers can't serve in the military can't get a universal injunction on that nationwide. An executive order that says FEMA is gutted and FEMA funds will not be distributed can't get an injunction nationwide, anywhere. An executive order that says no LGBTQ materials are allowed to be displayed in any federal funded library can't get a universal injunction. It's really, really, really bad. And, we have to see what we're up against in order to understand what's coming next. All right. Now, let me just say a couple of things, however, about how we maneuver around this. All right. One of the things that is, a really weird silver lining to this in the context of what the Supreme Court has done in furtherance of making Trump a king is that no nationwide injunctions means no nationwide injunctions for anyone. So Kaczmarek, that really crappy judge and the single judge in that district court in Texas, who, for instance, issued a nationwide injunction banning the use of mifepristone for medicated abortion, can't do that anymore. It means, for instance, that when people come to him with crazy cases that say the ACA should be completely dismantled nationwide on a given provision, he can't issue a nationwide injunction on that anymore. It also means very interesting things for blue states. Because, for instance, right now, let's say hypothetically that a blue state legislature passes a law saying everybody who is born in a foreign country, who has boots on the ground in that state, is now a U.S. citizen. Let's just say hypothetically, like Minnesota did that and Tim Walz signed the bill. There's really not any way that there can be an injunction prohibiting that, because the federal court in Minnesota would only be able to issue an injunction on behalf of like somebody else, and it wouldn't be an individual that would have standing to challenge it. So there's an opportunity here that there's a means by which blue states could really, if they had the political will, which is a huge if, start passing laws that nobody can stop, right? I mean, I mentioned this morning. Let's just say hypothetically that like California says that all Medicaid issued funds given to the state of California have to be distributed, or may be distributed, let's say, in furtherance of gender affirming care for trans people. Can't get a nationwide injunction banning that, right? Or let's just go even further. Let's just say like California legislature passes a law that says like every single person born in California is entitled to all the rights and, privileges of being a U.S. citizen, and that their parents therefore have like, as opposed to birthright citizenship, like parental citizenship. Can't get a nationwide injunction to stop it. There may be other reasons to challenge it under law, but you get my point. So there's a chance here for folks to exploit this, all right? To exploit it for the greater good. All that said, I think this is a real come to Jesus moment for people who are trying to navigate around the regime, because we have seen, as we've talked about a lot this week and a lot over the last 6 months, the lower courts be a true backstop to what Trump is trying to do. I've mentioned like multiple times this week that up until today, 94% of the cases that have challenged Trump's policies in federal court have resulted in an injunction. 94%. This is one reason, by the way, inside the budget bill, the Republicans were trying to get that provision passed that stopped the federal courts from being able to issue injunctions or hold people in contempt. SCOTUS just did it for them. They don't need to do it through the budget bill anymore. I mean, the Senate parliamentarian already jettisoned it, but nonetheless, they don't have to do it by legislation now because SCOTUS just made it the law. So the thing I want people to think about right now is that like the courts have been neutered of one of the major ways in which you can stop Trump. Now, there's one other legal mechanism here that we should talk about that is potentially in play. And many of you know that I was a class action lawyer. First 7 years of my practice, did a little bit more for 3 years more, okay? And class action lawyers take a really bad rap in this country. Unjustifiably so, because they're actually used. One of the reasons why they're so bad-mouthed is because they're out there actually, in many instances, trying to push forward justice. And I have a lot of friends who are still in the class action bar, very active in it, and are doing those kind of cases all the time, right? Like, a pharmaceutical company manufactures a defective product that kills people. They start a mass tort case, which is not quite the same thing as a class action, to try to get all those people relief, all right? An environmental issue develops when like a coal plant poisons the water in a given state. The way that you remedy that is through the class action mechanism of Rule 23 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. So the interesting thing about the Supreme Court's ruling this morning is that it says that injunctions can only issue to the extent necessary to provide complete relief, that's a quote, complete relief to the parties before the court. Well, if the parties before the court are a certified class of nationwide people, then presumably you can't provide complete relief without issuing a nationwide injunction. So class action lawyers are now a potential backstop to a lot of this shit. And I'm going to remind everybody that Judge Boasberg and I think Judge Zinnes issued class certification rulings within hours of some of these mass deportation cases being filed. Okay? So a judge who wants to move quickly on a class certification can. Unfortunately, in most class action cases, it takes months to certify a class. But with judges who really understand the gravity of what we're dealing with the Trump administration, they may be willing to move in that direction. So what does that mean? It means that every case now that is going to be filed to challenge a Trump EO is going to be filed as a class action litigation. And that means class action lawyers are going to be really busy. Now, we spent some time here before talking about how class actions work. I'm not going to go through my whole ex-Columbia law professor spiel on this today because we've done it before. But I'm going to remind you all, class certification is not easy. You have to show that the members of the class have similar and common legal and factual issues, and that those issues predominate over the other issues that may make them different. Okay, so let me give you an example here. Let's just say hypothetically, you're going into court to challenge Trump's ban on trans soldiers in the military. You have to certify a class of trans soldiers in the military, all of whom are about to lose their ability to be in the military itself. They're about to be like dishonorably discharged or something. Okay. You couldn't include in that class trans people not in the military, right? Because the class would have to be limited to people who are sharing the same common issues of law and fact. And those issues would have to predominate, okay? You also probably couldn't include like former trans soldiers who might lose their honorable discharge. They would have to be in a separate class because they would have a separate harm, all right? I'm trying to like layperson this down as much as possible so everybody can understand it. But one of the things that is really critical here is that if it's done right, class action lawyers could end up getting judges who want to do it to issue nationwide injunctions for a nationwide class, okay? And this, again, is something that is going to have to be tried and tested in the courts. Now, when I've been talking about this on Blue Sky this morning, there are a lot of people that are like, man, then it's just going to go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to say you can't do it in that case. Yes, but do we stop fighting as a result? Right? Like, let me point this out. I think people are probably right that if Democrats try this, there's going to be pushback from SCOTUS. That doesn't mean we don't try it, right? That doesn't mean we like abandon the room that we've been given on the playing field such as it is. And that means that Democratic states should start trying wild forms of legislation to see what sticks, right? That is in the greater good. It means that class action lawyers should actually be litigating these cases on a class basis because there's room to maneuver there and we should take it, right? The language of this opinion is very specific. The amount of injunctive relief that the district courts are now allowed to order is the amount that allows for complete relief for the parties that are before the court. Complete relief. So let's just say hypothetically you certify a class, again, let's just say, of people seeking self-medicated abortion care who are mad about a ban on mifepristone. And want to kind of like, or another EO that Trump has written that bans medicated abortion care. Let's just go into hypotheticals here, okay? That class, if it's certified, again, could provide a block on that EO nationwide, if the class is nationwide. If the class is only like 4 states, the ban on injunctive relief will extend only to those 4 states. So these are places where we have to really start maximizing the room that we've been given, all right? And, the other thing I'm just going to say here is this is a moment to also recognize, I feel like I've been saying this for months, but I just have to repeat it, that any one of these things, these ways of pushing back without the other, doesn't account for the power of the people, all right? So I've been saying for a long time that we need like pushback in the courts, pushback through like progressive candidates getting elected, pushback in the streets, pushback behind the scenes where people are building dual power in their own communities. Like everybody has a role to play right now and we can't neglect it. Because the other thing I'm just going to say now about this, and again, out of the box thinking, but I think one of the problems with where we all have been as activists and organizers, if we have not been at this game very long or we haven't been educated in like radical history, just by way of example, is that we constrain ourselves to the ideas that things have to be rectified through the courts or through elections. We have no idea how this regime is going to end. I just want to make that really clear, right? We're in totally uncharted territory right now. We're in the territory of countries where like dictators have to get overthrown, right? Where whole new systems of government have to be set up. And so it's time to lose the kind of depression about the fact that fundamentally we're not a republic anymore and we're not a functioning democracy and Trump now has the authority to override the Constitution, and start thinking about what we're going to do in response to that. For real, right? I mean, what are we going to do? Again, I'm just going to say nonviolent way. What are we going to do that's going to result in change, right? And start thinking outside the current constraints of the system. Right. This is one reason, by the way, why dual power is so important, why we ran the dual power accelerator literally 2 weeks after the election and started running it through the spring, because dual power, by the way, operates entirely outside of the system as it's built. It is the idea that we have the capacity to create change outside of the systems that control us. And in fact, it's one of the philosophies behind it is that it's actually mandatory that we do that we create alternative systems of local support, that we create alternative systems of figuring out how to solve problems. So again, critically important to like not allow yourself to sit in that space of despair. Like it sucks. Don't get me wrong. It's really bad. Like I'm not going to sit here and like sugarcoat this to you guys today, but that doesn't mean we're out of options. And, you know, I have to say, like, I kind of came to terms with the fact immediately after the election that the re-election of Trump would probably be the end of America. You know, nobody knows how this is going to play out. But I had a moment where I was like, if this goes the way Project 2025 wants it to go, like the country really won't exist anymore. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is like, what comes after that? Like, that's really the space we need to be living in right now. Because yes, I hear all of you in the comments going like, I don't recognize my country anymore. To which I also have to say like, this is the country of slavery and indigenous genocide and the destruction of Reconstruction after the Civil War that would have prevented all this nonsense, right? This is the country that has always done this, that has always enslaved people, that has always denied Black and brown and indigenous people and LGBTQ people their rights. This is a country that denied women the right to vote and, you know, Black women in particular until the 60s, right? Like, this is that country too. And, you know, so we have to be really mindful of the fact that, like, the foundation has been cracked from the beginning. And the question that we have to be asking ourselves, like, and you can grieve it, like, you want to grieve what's left of America, go ahead. I've had my moments, right? But we have to start asking ourselves about, like, exactly what comes next. Because a country that is built on a foundation of white supremacy cannot survive forever. Just in the same way that fascist regimes do not survive forever. Right? Like we were cracked from the beginning. And, you know, if it's not remedied and healed, that was Reconstruction, which failed because like white people who formerly owned slaves got too much power in the Senate and, you know, in other ways. And the Supreme Court endorsed those ways, right? Like anyone who doesn't recognize that that's where we were kind of can't see that this is where we were inevitably going to end up if there wasn't some form of actual reconstruction and healing, right? And I'm with the people. Like, there's Black lawyers this morning on Blue Sky who are calling for like a second form of reconstruction, which would eradicate Trumpism from the land when this is all over. Like, if we're not committed to that, if Democratic politicians can't stand up and fucking fight, get out of the way. Like, that's where we are right now. And, you know, I'm sorry for cursing, but it's like real. The Democratic Party is like recalcitrantly standing by while all of this goes down. And if they're not going to fight, that leaves people like us to organize in the streets, to organize in our own communities, to create alternative methods of survival, to make sure that we're pushing our blue governors and legislatures to do radical things right now so that people survive, right? Like, we've got to be like outside of the box on this shit. Like immediately. I mean, honestly, we needed to be in that place on November 6th, but you know, here we are. Some of us have been cogitating in this for like a long time now. Okay. We have to talk about the other Supreme Court cases today because a lot of this stuff was really not good. Like it was a bad day in front of the Supreme Court. There were a couple of good decisions, but there's a lot of really bad stuff. So today, Supreme Court also ruled that if you as a parent have a religious objection to LGBTQ books being shown in your child's school, you have a right to an opt-out of your child's public education. So what does this mean in practice? What it means is that because public schools don't have the capacity to give every single parent in every single public school notice when they're going to like teach a book that has LGBTQ history in it, fundamentally LGBTQ curriculum will be removed from public school systems in states that will not offer protections. It's bad. It's really bad. It's really bad. Like essentially they gave, a morass to public education in this country that cannot be administered properly under law. Really, really bad. Really, really bad. Again, I'm not like sugarcoating it. Okay. We also had the upholding today of a case that, you know, once again, I have to say the far right from a messaging standpoint has this incredible capacity sometimes to make things sound like they're a good thing when they're absolute crap. Okay, so today, another case in front of the Supreme Court, Texas passed a law saying that you had to like confirm your age before accessing adult content. They passed a law on the internet. You have to prove that you were 18 or over before you can access adult content. And the Supreme Court upheld 6-3 again, that particular law. But I'm going to tell you something that's really nefarious about this. The definition of adult content is not just the kinds of things that you would ordinarily imagine. So I want everybody to think about how adult content can be defined. It can be defined as like queer health sites. It can be defined as sites that provide education and support to trans and non-binary youth. It can be defined as any material about sexual education. You want anybody under 18 to not be able to access like information about their own development? You just designate it as adult content. Really bad. Really, 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 really bad. So that's our 3 cases that are like descending into fascism today. Not putting any gloss on that, but we did have 2 good decisions today out of the Supreme Court. One on the ACA. This was a case that challenged the requirement of employers to provide PrEP, which is, of course, HIV preventative drugs, under the terms of the ACA. Okay. And the Supreme Court held that the ACA survives and PrEP coverage is safe and you can still get PrEP under the ACA. So that's really good, right? Very good. Not a problem. Okay. The other thing that survived today was the broadband subsidy, which is actually a very big deal in poor communities. The broadband subsidy essentially required any company that was building broadband to contribute to a fund that would provide broadband in less accessible communities, rural communities, poor communities, so that broadband could be accessible to everyone. Fundamentally building out the idea that broadband is a necessary utility for learning, which of course it is. Like anybody who's got a kid in public school knows you need internet these days, right? So that survived. All right. That also survived. But, on the whole, not ideal. Not a good day for democracy. Not a good day. And there's going to be a lot written about this, a lot of think pieces. A lot of people are going to be out there talking about it. I happen to agree with Mariam Kaba that one of the problems right now with like the legal punditry class on mainstream media is that they don't actually grasp in many instances, particularly if they have not been like activist lawyers themselves or had some intersection with like radical left thinking about how the law can be used, are out there talking about this in ways that are not really giving the true scope of what's at stake. All right. So I want you all to be very cautious. And I'm not going to name names here, but I mean, like you should be following the more radical lawyers like Elie Mystal, like myself, who actually see the full scope of what this indicates and also see the ways in which you can kind of like weave through it. All right. And I will also just say one other thing. It's really time to get familiar with the more radical legal organizations. I mentioned one of them this morning, which is like, it used to be called Trial Lawyers for Public Justice. My really good friend, Lori Andrus, lives in San Francisco, runs a law firm that does only class action litigation with regard to women's rights issues. She's freaking amazing. She is currently the president of AAJ, which is the organization that succeeded Trial Lawyers for Public Justice. I think it's American Advocates for Justice or American Association for Justice. And it's all trial lawyers who are out there fighting for people's rights, basically. They're like on deck right now. Like this is their jam. And they're going to be doing phenomenal work. But I just want to remind everybody that it is really critical right now to get very, very clear on who you're listening to, because there's going to be a lot of people running around today who are going to be really in the minutiae of what's happening in this decision. You're going to watch like those big name legal pundits go line by line through particular decisions, and they're going to miss the forest for the trees, right? They're going to miss the opportunities that like I've laid out here today of the ways in which this could be used and manipulated by states and by lawyers who actually want to continue moving the needle forward. All right. But all that said, I don't want to forget the bigger picture of this, which is that fundamentally the Supreme Court has now said to Donald Trump, you can do whatever you want and no one can really stop you, absent like these procedural mechanisms that a lot of people won't understand how to fight, right? And also we have to think through the fact that like lawyers aren't cheap. And people who don't have access to lawyers or otherwise have access to like pro bono services or lawyers who will work on contingency or lawyers who are willing to do this work for free are going to really struggle, like really, really struggle. So, the hypotheticals can get really bad here. I've spun through a couple of them myself this morning, right? Like, the Supreme Court authorized the administration last week to just, that it didn't have to wait to give people due process fundamentally to restart deportations. So you have a situation here where, let's just say hypothetically, because I'm going to run through it. I want you to understand how this could work, right? Trump issues an EO that says like anybody of descent from an African country born in this country doesn't have birthright citizenship. And they start mass rounding up and deporting people who are descended from African countries, right? Because there's no due process really fundamentally anymore, those deportations start right away. And it will take lawyers going into court on an emergency basis, filing class notification, making sure that those class certification proceedings result in the class being granted to stop that. And it may not work before planes actually land in a gulag in El Salvador. Okay. So like the scope of this is very big, right? It's very big. But all hope is not lost. And I just want to make this really clear. We still have so much power and people need to not forget that, right? And again, I've been saying for quite some time, that the people who are coming to save us are us, right? Like we're it. And, anybody who's been waiting for like salvation to come at the hands of the court, I think has been sorely disappointed from that, like all the way back to 2018. So from the perspective of where we sit right now, and again, I'm going to say this because I think it's really important to everybody who's listening today, like really, really critical. If you are concerned about this, if you are spinning out, if you are afraid, if you are having that emotional reaction of fight or flight, like your job today, you can take a day, it's okay. But your job thereafter is to get involved in an organization where you live. It honestly doesn't matter to me whether it's an organization doing direct political work or not. You can get involved with local organizations that are simply helping out people where you live, right? A local shelter for the unhoused, a food pantry, a community health clinic, a place that, distributes clothing to people who need it, right? Organizations that are mutual aid organizations that give haircuts to people who are living on the street. It really doesn't matter to me how you get involved, all right? But the fundamental nature of where we are right now is that if you're not involved, absent like an inability to be involved, you're homebound, you're immune compromised, you're disabled, you can't leave your house, right? And even then there are ways to get involved. Not getting involved right now is capitulation. Because every single person is needed, right? We need people on the front lines of protests. We need people behind the scenes organizing those protests. We need people who are in the courts using lawyers through the mechanisms that remain to get it done. We need people behind the scenes doing community-based work, right? We need folks who are engaged, who are helping their community in whatever way they can, right? Like I'll just be free and clear on this. Some of the work that I'm doing right now in my organizing work is branding work. Like you want to talk about like way outside of the box, but I'm working with a local organization here that's trying to grow their membership to benefit their social justice initiatives. And I'm advising them on how to do that for free, right? There's all sorts of ways in which you can get involved right now that will make a difference. And nobody's talents are wasted. And the thing that I think we really have to do right now is like step back completely from the idea that we are helpless. Just like abandon it. Recognize it as the indoctrination of American white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. None of us are powerless. None of us. Everybody can do something, right? And everybody deserves to receive something also. Like I have to remind you all, mutual aid, again, is not just like give. It's also like receive what you need. Live into a future where there is like equitable and shared power. Like that's what we have to start doing right now. And the other thing I will just say here is that like, it's also time to start beating each other up and buying into division and doing all the stuff of like, that group over there is a threat to me over here. That candidate in New York City is a threat to me over here on the other side of the country. Come on. That's not how we win. That's like capitulation to propaganda and division, and it only benefits the fascists. So, it's really critical at this point that you get involved. Like I feel sometimes like I say this every single day, but this is like the point, the moment where if you haven't done it yet, you need to go to a meeting, show up for a Zoom call, find out how you can assist, offer your help to organizations that are already doing the work. Check on your neighbors, right? Build community where you live. And it doesn't have to be major, right? Because every single thing counts, right? The only thing that doesn't count is doing nothing when you can. All right. I have to mention one other thing here that is just really critical because I got asked some questions about it on the Patreon feed. So for those who are not aware, in the aftermath of Mondani winning the Democratic nomination inside New York City, there has been a massive, obscene, Islamophobic propaganda campaign to convince Jewish Americans that he is going to destroy Jews in New York City. And I just have to say that it's revolting, it's really upsetting, and it is designed to play upon people's intergenerational trauma, particularly inside the Jewish community. I will tell you, many of you know that, I lived in New York City proper for 18 years, okay? I have an enormous number of friends inside, and I live in the greater New York City area now. I have an enormous number of friends of all sorts of backgrounds inside New York City, okay? I have Jewish friends who ranked Mamdani first. Okay. I have Jewish friends who ranked him second after Brad Lander. I have Jewish friends who ranked him third. Okay. I don't have a single Jewish New Yorker friend, though, who didn't rank Mamdani, because the Jewish New Yorkers who live in New York City understand that he's not a threat. Okay. What's happening in other parts of the country is that there is massive propaganda being farmed out to the Jewish community claiming that Jews should flee New York. Okay. And I'm going to tell you right here in the New York City area, there is an enormous degree of alarm about the absolutely racist and Islamophobic attacks that are being directed toward Mamdani in real time. It's disgusting. And it's actually, by the way, driving people more in his direction rather than less. Okay. So one of the reasons why I want people to be aware of this is that this is predictable bullshit. All right. Mamdani is a threat to the status quo for a variety of reasons. He wants to tax the rich in New York City so poor people have food to eat, so that buses are free and people have like decent commutes. Okay. So that things like the lives of everyday New Yorkers are benefited. And so everybody can afford to live there. All right. And the folks in power find this really dangerous because his coalition is multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-gendered, and has thrown nobody under the bus. And there are facts in all of this that are kind of getting lost, right? Like Mamdani co-endorsed Brad Lander, Jewish candidate. Lander also endorsed Mamdani. Both of them did events together. They did videos together on social media. They stood together and talked about the fact that like Jewish and Muslim New Yorkers needed to unite. Okay. So this whole thing is like one big massive propaganda campaign. And I'm going to add one other thing to this that I just have to clarify because I feel like I really need to say this. Okay. Criticism of the policies of the Netanyahu government is not anti-Semitic. Okay. Just in the same way that if you were criticizing the policies of, let's just say hypothetically, let's take a historical example, the Khmer Rouge, you would not be considered to be anti-Cambodian. Just in the same way that criticizing the policies of the Trump administration does not make you anti-American. And there's a huge conflation that the far-right white supremacists are playing into right now that is telling people that criticizing the Netanyahu government's choices is per se unilaterally anti-Semitic. That is a lie. That is a lie. It is propagandist and it is being fed to people to divide, to cause strife, to cause people who need to unify, to fight against Trump, to fight against the policies of this administration, to fight against white people in power who want to destroy us all, to stop us from doing that work. And it's time to wake up. Sorry for clapping, but it's time to wake up. It's time to recognize that if your intergenerational trauma is being triggered by propaganda, that is by design, okay? And I'm going to say this. You can criticize things that Mamdani has said in the past, but is there some massive effort to harm New York City Jews? Absolutely not. Like, that is a fundamental lie. And it's making me really angry because my Jewish friends in New York are like feeling it and hearing it from people around the country and going like, what the fuck are people talking about? Like, that's not what he's doing. That's not what's happening in New York City. So be very, very mindful at this point of what you're seeing and reading if you happen to be somebody who is partaking of that kind of noise, all right? Because we have to get really clear here on what those in power want to do. Okay. They have been trying to tell us that we have to throw immigrants under the bus. They've been trying to tell us, including centrist Democrats, that we have to throw trans people under the bus. They have been trying to tell us that we have to segregate ourselves because that person's a threat to me, or that person's a threat to me, or that politician wants me dead. All of it is by design. Okay. All of us have to get on the bus because the only people who are going to be safe given what's happening right now, and even then, there are big questions, are white, cis, het, able-bodied, Republican, Christian men. Everybody else is under threat. And I'm going to say one other thing here because it's really important. You can't regulate somebody else's body and simultaneously keep your own bodily dominion. You can't say that trans child over there doesn't deserve gender-affirming care if you want access to hormones as a menopausal cis, het woman, right? You can't say that person doesn't deserve their free speech rights to criticize the Netanyahu government and simultaneously want yours. Doesn't work like that. It's all or nothing, folks. Everybody on the bus. And it's time to kind of like get in line. All right. That was a rant today. But I'm like wound up, right? Like it's really important right now that we get very clear about where we're at. And I'm sorry it's a bad day. And also simultaneously, there's still an enormous amount of hope if we can just get our shit together, right? Start doing the work, like line up. I'm going to tell you, I thought this morning back in the days when we were organizing the mass mobilization against family separation in 2019, where I had a conversation with a senior person at Reverend Barber's organization, Poor People's Campaign, about what it was going to take to battle back Trumpism. It's hard to believe that conversation was 6 years ago now, but we had this incredibly like wide-ranging conversation about breakthrough moments and breakthrough movements and what they look like. And what she said to me is like, this moment is coming where everybody lines up together. Everybody who's marginalized, everybody who's scared, everybody who's terrified, everybody who's been under threat, everybody whose rights are being jeopardized, everybody who's afraid for their neighbor or their loved ones or the disabled person next door to them or the child who doesn't necessarily know if their parents are going to be in the country tomorrow. There is a moment for everyone to line up. And, you know, I'm just going to say it, friends, that moment is now. You know, you got to get on board. You got to get on board. It's all or nothing. Everybody on the bus. All right. That's it for today. For our Patreon subscribers, there will be a bonus broadcast today at 3 p.m. If you want to get in on that, you can subscribe at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. So I will see all our Patreon people at 3 p.m. today for another broadcast. Also, reminder that if you don't know how to create change where you live, we can help you with that. There is a downloadable guide available. It's already in the show notes that is beautifully designed and full of information about how you can lead change where you live, particularly without burning out in this era. And I just want to mention one other thing to you all here. You know that we have this new initiative that we started in January called the Ripple Effect Institute. You can book a free call with me if you're interested in learning. If you feel called right now, like you want to make a difference before your days are over, right? You feel called to make a bigger impact than what you're doing right now, you can book a free call with me or a member of my staff, and we will talk to you about like what your challenges are and what you want to get done and what your vision looks like. And if you're interested, we'll also tell you about the Ripple Effect Institute and how you can become a part of it, which, by the way, is an incredibly radical and important endeavor that is changing lives all over the country right now. So I will drop the link to that also in the comments if you want to book a free call with me. We do ask you to fill out a survey so that we know like you're going to take it seriously. Don't blow us off if we book a call with one of our people. But we're here and we're doing all that work and we're doing it very intentionally because we believe that change is possible right now and we hope you do too. All right. Lots of love, everybody. I will catch you all on Tuesday. There will be an educational video on our new Ripple Effect sister channel. The link for that is also below in the show notes. You should go over there and subscribe. On Monday, we are talking about the work that needs to be done in the face of rising fascism. And we recorded that video 2 weeks ago before any of this shit went down, but it's very timely. All right. So that will be available on Monday, and I will catch you all live on Tuesday as usual. Please, please, please do not neglect the work that all of us need to be doing right now. It's more important now than it even was like at midnight last night. All right, my friends, lots of love. Hang in there, and I will see you soon. Bye.